Hi, I'm Jen from Tea Leaves and Tweed, and welcome to another baking video. This week I thought we would do something a little bit more complicated, and one of the things I've really been enjoying making while we've been home is bread. So because homemade bread gives you the opportunity to kind of work out your frustrations while you're kneading it. So I've decided that we're going to make a brioche this week. So I've made this recipe once before, and sadly it didn't quite turn out as wonderfully as it did the first time, but I thought I would take you through my process. I'm using a recipe from delish.com, which I'll link below, but I'm making it entirely by hand because pretty much every brioche recipe I've found involves the use of a stand mixer with a dough hook, which I don't have. So I'll take you through the process and then you'll meet me back here. We can cut into our lovely loaf of brioche bread. So let's bake. So the first step of this recipe is to make a sponge. So let's start with that. That just involves taking half a cup of flour, a teaspoon and an eighth, which is about a half a packet of yeast, and a quarter cup of milk. You don't want this to be too cold, but it's gonna sit for a while, so if you put it in a warm place, it'll overcome being cold. And you just stir that together into kind of a gloopy thing. And then you just kind of want to let this sit. It says to let it sit for an hour, but what I do is I take my butter out and I let that sit out at room temperature, and when the butter is soft enough, I come back to my sponge. So we'll come back to this when the butter has softened and keep going. So now we have our sponge and it's kind of gotten stretchy and soft. So I'm gonna just break this up a little bit and we'll add the rest of our ingredients. So the first thing you wanna add are 3 eggs. And I like to add these one at a time. And this is gonna look like a complete and total mess. Like, this is not gonna actually work in very easily. But you work this dough a lot. And just kind of get it as started as you can. You mostly just want to beat the eggs. And there's our last egg. And then this is a quarter cup of sugar and a teaspoon of salt. And we'll get that worked in. And the sugar kind of helps a little bit because the crystals will help cut into this dough sponge, which is pretty thick. So now we add a little, this is a cup and a half of flour. So we'll add a little bit of that and start working that in. And this will help it start to kind of come together. And of course, this would be made much easier if you have a stand mixer with a dough hook attachment, which is how the recipe was originally written. But I, of course, don't. So I'm doing this by hand, which is a little bit more work and elbow grease. But it's definitely worth it to be able to have fresh brioche dough at home, especially because I'm missing my favorite French bakery and the brioche that I used to get there once a week. So now we'll work the rest of the flour in. This is actually a really sticky dough. And this was actually one of the things that really confused me the first time I worked with this dough, is it is just incredibly sticky. So now we've got that kind of worked together, and we're going to take it and turn it out onto our clean counter. And it is going to stick to everything. Like, it sticks to everything. You just kind of have to embrace the stickiness. So now we've got our very sticky dough on the counter, and you just kind of want to smear it around. And you'll just smear this dough around and scoop it together occasionally and just accept the fact that it is going to stick to you, it's going to stick to the counter, it's going to stick to everything. And you'll notice that I'm doing this at my kitchen counter, which doesn't have as good an angle as my dining table, and that's because my kitchen counter is a much smoother surface, so I don't have to worry about bits of dough getting kind of embedded in those little nooks and crannies of the wood while I'm doing this kind of smearing method. So you just want to work this around for a little bit. Just get yourself nice and covered in dough. Resist the urge to flour. It doesn't help. Take it from me. You just have to keep going. And eventually everything will be okay and you will be rewarded with a beautiful dough, but not for a while. So now I've been working this for maybe 5 minutes and we're gonna start adding our butter. So I've got a stick of softened butter. It's unsalted and you just want to pinch off like a tablespoon at a time. And you'll add that into your dough and just start working it in. Just start rubbing it in. And you want to rub each butter addition in until it disappears. So I'm going to just keep adding butter a little bit at a time. So now I'm just going to add my last addition of butter. And once I have this incorporated in, now you just want to knead the dough. And you can't knead this like a regular dough because it's just so soft and sticky. So I found that this kind of scrubbing, smearing motion is the best way to knead this dough. So I'll meet you back here in possibly more than 15, 20, 30 minutes to get this dough to where it's supposed to be. You want to keep kneading it until it starts coming away from things and holding together instead of smearing all over the place. So now you can see that this is starting to pull away relatively cleanly from the counter. I have done nothing to this counter. I have not washed my hands in between. I have not added anything to the dough since that last addition of butter. So it's been about 20 minutes and this is looking like a pretty nice dough. So now we need to go wash our bowl out and put a little bit of ghee or oil in it to grease it and set this up to rest for about an hour and rise. So now I'm just going to unwrap this. And give it a little punch down. And then I'm going to rewrap it. And we're going to put this in the fridge overnight to help it develop some flavor. So now it is the next morning and I have my dough from the fridge. This has been sitting out for about half an hour because the high butter content of this dough means that it is kind of hard as a rock when it's fresh out of the fridge. And I have my buttered loaf pan. And I'm just going to take my dough, kind of stretch it and form it roughly into a loaf shape. And then this is going to want to go in the loaf pan and be covered and you'll just let this sit out until it puffs up and is beautiful. You go wash this. So here's our loaf of bread. It's been about 6 hours since I put this out to rise. It's very cold in my house today, so I'm going to preheat my oven and get this in the oven to bake. We've baked our brioche at 375 Fahrenheit for about 40 minutes until it's 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit inside, and I've let it cool for about an hour. And you can see it just has the most beautiful crumb, and it's soft and it smells delicious. Now I have my cup of, this is a silver needle white tea. It has a beautiful springy flavor. It tastes like flowers and summer fruits and fresh grass. I'm just going to have a slice of bread. It's just delicious. It's a little bit denser than the last time I made it, but it is still absolutely gorgeous. And this will also be very lovely toasted tomorrow morning with a little bit of butter and jam for my morning cup of tea, if it lasts that long. So this was homemade brioche bread by hand on a weekly baking video here at Tea Leaves and Tweed. Thank you for joining me this week, and I hope I'll see you again sometime. Bye.